The lock on the basement door was brand new. I noticed that first, the brass still bright. No scratches on the faceplate, the deadbolt sliding with the clean resistance of something installed that week. Margaret Calloway turned the key with both hands, like the lock was heavier than it was, and the door swung inward to reveal a wooden staircase descending into fluorescent light. "It's not much," she said, "but it's ready." I stood behind her in the hallway of a house I'd been inside exactly once before, holding a duffel bag containing everything I thought I'd need for 2 weeks. Clothes, medication, 2 novels, a laptop with downloaded films, the kind of packing you do when you think you're being cautious but don't yet understand what cautious means. My name is Owen McGuire. I was 34 years old. I taught 8th grade earth science at Bridlewood Middle School in Garfield County, and I'd been renting the guest cottage behind the Callaways' property since September. That was 5 months of polite distance. 5 months of Margaret leaving jars of tomato sauce on my doorstep and her husband, Dale, nodding from across the yard while he split firewood in the early dark of autumn mornings. Their daughter, Nora, was 14 and had spoken to me exactly twice, once to ask if I had a dog, once to tell me the Wi-Fi password. Their son, Bram, was 11 and watched me from windows. We were not close. That's important to understand. I was the tenant. The arrangement was financial, not familial. When the first reports out of Meridian, Mississippi started circulating the cell phone footage, the emergency room overflows. The highway blockades. Dale Calloway knocked on my cottage door at 6 in the morning and laid out the plan with the same flat practicality he used for everything. "We've got a basement," he said. "Concrete walls, separate ventilation. We've been stocking it since October." Since October. That meant they'd started preparing before the first confirmed case was made public, before Meridian was a word anyone outside Mississippi used in conversation. I didn't ask how they'd known. Rural people have a different relationship with preparedness. Some of them are paranoid. Some of them are right. "Margaret and I are driving to Evansville to get her mother," Dale continued. "She can't travel alone. Nora and Bram will be with us. We'll be back in 2 days, maybe 3. And you want me in the basement. I want someone watching the house. But more than that." He paused. Dale wasn't a man who paused often. "If things move faster than they're saying on the news, you'll be safer down there than in that cottage. The windows alone. You've got single-pane glass on all 4 sides." He was right. The cottage was charming, bright, and essentially indefensible. "There's food for 3 weeks," he said. "Water for longer. The filtration system runs off the same well as the house. There's a radio, battery bank, first aid. The gun safe is in the southeast corner. Combinations written inside the pantry cabinet." I remember standing in the doorway of my cottage, coffee going cold in my hand, watching Dale Calloway's breath cloud in the January air while he described a world I didn't fully believe was coming. The news was alarming, sure. But the news was always alarming. This felt like an overreaction from a man who owned too many flashlights. 2 days, I said. 3 at the outside. He extended his hand. We shook. His grip was dry and firm and brief. "Keep the doors locked. Stay off the main road. If you hear anything upstairs you can't explain, you stay below. Don't investigate." They left within the hour. Margaret hugged me at the front door, a quick, almost apologetic embrace, and pressed a folded paper into my hand. Phone numbers. Her mother's address in Evansville. A neighbor's name I didn't recognize. Nora climbed into the back of the Suburban without looking at me. Bram waved once from behind the window, his palm flat against the glass, like a kid in a photograph. The Suburban pulled down the gravel drive, turned east onto Harlan Road, and disappeared behind the tree line. That was January 11th. It is now March. They never came back. The first day alone was almost pleasant. That sounds wrong, given everything that followed. But honesty matters more than performance at this point, and the truth is, the basement was comfortable. Dale and Margaret had built it for exactly this purpose, not a wine cellar or a storage space converted in haste, but a shelter designed with intention. The main room was roughly 20 by 30 feet, poured concrete on all sides. The floor sealed with epoxy and layered with rubber-backed rugs. 2 cots along the east wall, a third folding cot leaned against the water heater. Metal shelving units ran the full length of the south wall, stacked with labeled bins, canned vegetables, dried beans, rice, powdered milk, medical supplies, batteries, hygiene products. Each bin had a date written in Margaret's careful handwriting. A small kitchen area occupied the northwest corner. A camp stove with propane canisters stored beneath a steel table. A utility sink connected to the well line. A 5-gallon water jug with a hand pump. The ventilation system hummed through a duct that ran up through the wall and exited somewhere on the north face of the house. Fitted with a HEPA filter and a manual damper. I spent that first afternoon taking inventory, mostly because it gave me something to do. 26 cans of corn, 18 cans of black beans, 42 cans of soup assorted, 12 jars of peanut butter, bags of rice measured and sealed in mylar, ibuprofen, acetaminophen, a bottle of amoxicillin with Dale's name on it, bandages, antiseptic, a suture kit still in its packaging. I counted everything. I wrote it down. I did the math on calorie ratios and daily water needs and felt, briefly, like a man solving a problem. The radio was a hand-crank emergency model, olive green, military surplus. I turned it on around 4 in the afternoon and found 3 stations still broadcasting. 2 were running automated emergency loops, the same FEMA recording I'd heard fragments of for the past week, instructing listeners to remain indoors, avoid contact with symptomatic individuals, report to designated safe zones if able. The third was a live broadcast out of Indianapolis. A man's voice, steady but hollowed out, reading a list of counties under mandatory evacuation. Garfield County wasn't on the list. Not yet. I turned the radio off after an hour because the silence that followed each county name was worse than the name itself. That evening, I heated a can of chicken noodle soup on the camp stove and sat on the cot that felt least like it belonged to someone else's child. I ate slowly. I listened to the house above me, the tick of the heating system, the creak of joists, the almost subliminal vibration of wind against the clapboard siding. Ordinary sounds. The sounds of a house being a house with nobody in it. I told myself they were driving. I told myself Margaret's mother was slow to pack, or the roads were congested, or Dale had decided to wait one more day to assess conditions. I told myself these things with the careful discipline of a man who knows he's lying but isn't ready to stop. The second day, I stayed busy. I organized the shelving units more efficiently, grouping items by use rather than type. I checked the gun safe, 2 rifles, a shotgun, a handgun, ammunition in boxes separated by caliber. I didn't touch them. I'd fired a rifle twice in my life, both times at a range in college, both times badly. I told myself I'd learn if I needed to. Another comfortable lie. By the third day, the day they should have returned, I was checking the radio every hour. The Indianapolis station was gone. The automated loops continued. But one had changed. The FEMA message now included a new instruction to avoid all travel between the hours of dusk and dawn. No explanation. The implication was enough. I went upstairs for the first time that evening. I told myself I was checking the perimeter. What I was really doing was looking for headlights on Harlan Road. I stood at the living room window in the Callaways' house, in the dark, watching the road for 30 minutes. Nothing passed. No cars, no lights. The road was a black line between black trees under a sky with no moon. I went back downstairs, locked the basement door behind me, and sat on the cot with my hands between my knees. On the fourth day, I heard the first sound I couldn't explain. It came from the north side of the house, above and to the right of the basement stairs. Not a knock, not a branch against siding. A pressure sound, something leaning against the wall with sustained weight, then sliding along it. Slow, deliberate in the way that muscle is deliberate, not mind. I sat on the cot and didn't breathe. The sound traveled the length of the north wall, maybe 15 feet, then stopped. Silence. Then a different sound. Fingertips on glass. Light, almost delicate. The way you'd test whether a window was open. The kitchen window. I'd memorized the layout of the house above me by then. Traced it in my mind like a blueprint. The tapping stopped, then started again. Not rhythmic, not patterned, exploratory. Like something was testing the barrier without understanding what a barrier was. I stayed on the cot. Dale's voice in my head. Don't investigate. The tapping lasted maybe 3 minutes. Then the weight sound again, moving away from the window, around the corner of the house, fading. Then nothing. I waited an hour before I moved. I went to the gun safe. I entered the combination with shaking fingers I'd memorized it the day before. A small act of foresight that felt enormous now, and removed the handgun. A Glock 19. I knew that much from the label on the case. I loaded it the way I'd seen it done in movies and in a single afternoon YouTube tutorial I'd watched months ago for no reason I could name. The magazine clicked in. I chambered around. The mechanical sound was loud in the concrete room, and it made me feel something I can only describe as the opposite of safe, like I'd crossed a line that couldn't be uncrossed. And the weapon in my hand was proof that the world had changed in a way I hadn't agreed to. I didn't go upstairs. The next morning, day 5, I went up at first light. I checked every window from inside, moving through the rooms in a crouch that felt absurd and necessary. The kitchen window had a smear on the exterior glass. Not mud, not rain residue. A greasy, dark streak at about shoulder height, roughly the width of a forearm dragged across the surface. Below the window, in the frozen dirt of the garden bed, a single footprint. Bare, human-shaped. The toes had dug in deep, like the person had been standing on the balls of their feet, pressing forward. There was no blood, no torn clothing, no other sign, just the smear and the print. I went back to the basement. I locked the door. I sat with the gun on the cot beside me and turned on the radio. Static on all 3 frequencies. I cycled through the full band, found nothing, cycled again. One station caught briefly a woman's voice mid-sentence, something about a perimeter collapse in Louisville, then gone. That was the day I stopped waiting for the Callaways. Not consciously, not as a decision. But something in me shifted. The way a bone sets crooked when there's no one to align it. I stopped looking at the stairs and thinking they'll come down those stairs. I started looking at the stairs and thinking, what comes down those stairs if it isn't them? I rationed the food more aggressively. I studied the gun. I disassembled and reassembled the Glock 11 times that day, learning its geometry by feel, the way the slide rails seated, the tension of the recoil spring. I set up a schedule: eat at 7 and 5, radio check at 9 and 3, perimeter check from inside the house at noon if the basement had been quiet. On day 7, the power went out. The fluorescence died mid-morning without ceremony. One moment, light. Next moment, the heavy, encompassing dark of a room with no windows. I found the flashlight by touch, clicked it on, and stood in the narrow beam, feeling the house above me go silent in a new way. The heating system stopped. The ventilation fan stopped. The hum I hadn't realized I'd been leaning on. The electrical frequency of a functioning grid was gone. The basement got cold fast. I found the battery bank Dale had mentioned. A lithium setup connected to a small inverter. Enough to run the ventilation fan and a single LED lamp. Not enough for heat. I put on every layer I'd brought, zipped into the sleeping bag on the cot, and listened to the silence recalibrate itself into something I hadn't heard before. A house with power is alive. A house without it is just a structure. And a structure is just a shape between you and whatever's outside. The temperature in the basement dropped to what I estimate was 42 degrees within the first 12 hours of the outage. I know because Dale had a thermometer mounted on the shelving unit, a simple analog dial, the kind you'd hang in a greenhouse, and I checked it compulsively, as though the number itself was the threat rather than what the number meant. Concrete holds cold the way it holds everything, without opinion. The walls didn't care that I was shivering. The floor radiated a chill that crept through the rubber mats and into the soles of my boots, even when I was standing. I learned to stay on the cot, to keep the sleeping bag around my legs, to move only when I needed to eat or check the radio or use the bucket I designated as a latrine in the far corner. I burned calories just staying warm, which meant the food calculations I'd done on day 2 were already wrong. I revised them. At the new rate, accounting for the cold and the increased metabolic demand, I had maybe 20 days of food if I kept to 2 meals. If I cut to 1, I could stretch to 35. But 1 meal a day in a cold basement meant losing muscle mass fast, meant slower reaction times, meant my hands shaking when I held the gun. I compromised. 2 small meals. One at dawn. I'd started marking dawn by the faint change in air pressure I could feel through the ventilation duct, and one in the late afternoon. Rice and beans became the staple. I'd cook them together on the camp stove, which had the dual benefit of food and warmth, though I rationed propane carefully. 12 canisters. Each canister lasted approximately 2 hours of burn time. I limited cooking to 30 minutes per session, enough to boil the rice and heat the beans and warm my hands over the flame before shutting it down. The cold changed the way I thought. Not dramatically, not the delusional fog of hypothermia, but in small, practical compressions. I stopped thinking about the Callaways in narrative terms, stopped constructing scenarios of what might have happened on the road to Evansville. I thought about them in material terms instead. Dale's boots, which I'd seen by the front door upstairs, were they insulated? Margaret's winter coat in the hall closet, could I use it as a blanket? Nora's bedroom probably had extra quilts. On day 9, I went upstairs and took what I needed. The coat. 2 quilts from Nora's bed. One had horses on it, a child's pattern she'd probably outgrown but kept. A wool hat from the mudroom, Dale's insulated work gloves. I moved through the house quickly, not looking out the windows, and brought everything down to the basement in a single trip. Wrapping myself in a dead family's belongings is not something I can describe without acknowledging what it did to me. The coat smelled like Margaret lavender dryer sheets and something fainter, warmer, skin-adjacent. The quilt smelled like adolescent sleep, like the particular warmth of a teenager's room. I buried my face in it that first night and felt something crack open in my chest that I immediately sealed shut, because grief is a luxury, and luxury gets you killed. I kept the radio checks disciplined. morning and afternoon, 15 minutes each, cycling through the full AM and FM bands. Most days, nothing. Static across the spectrum, the white noise of a civilization that had stopped transmitting. Occasionally, I'd catch fragments of military frequency bleeding through, coordinates and unit designations I couldn't parse. Once, a gospel station that was either live or on a generator-powered loop, playing hymns into the void with no announcer, no interruption, just song after song until I turned it off because the beauty of it was too close to morning. On day 12, I heard gunfire. Not close, miles away, muffled by distance and terrain, but sustained. Not a hunter's rifle, automatic fire, the rapid percussion of something military, lasting maybe 15 seconds. Then silence. Then a second burst, shorter. Then nothing. I marked it in the notebook I'd started keeping. Day 12. Gunfire, north-northwest, estimated 3 to 5 miles. 2 bursts, no further activity. I wrote everything down. Temperatures, food consumed, sounds heard, time spent awake and asleep. The notebook became a form of company. A second voice in the room that was mine but organized, rational. The version of myself I needed to believe still existed. By day 14, 2 weeks, the original duration of what I'd packed for, I performed a full inventory. Remaining food would last, at current rationing, approximately 21 more days. Water was not an issue as long as the well pump held, and I discovered I could operate it manually using a hand pump Dale had rigged as a backup. Propane, 8 canisters remaining. Batteries, sufficient for another month of minimal use. Ammunition, untouched. I hadn't fired a single round. I had become, without deciding to, a person who lived in a hole in the ground and counted cans. Day 17 changed the architecture of my solitude. I developed a cautious routine for perimeter checks. Once a day, at midday when visibility was highest, I'd go upstairs, move to each window in sequence, scan the visible terrain, and return. I never opened a door. I never stepped outside. The world existed only as what I could see through glass. The Callaways' property sat on 4 acres of mixed land, cleared yard around the house, a tree line to the north and east, open field to the south sloping down toward Harlan Road, and my cottage to the west, visible from the kitchen window. Beyond the road, more fields. Then the wooded hills that rolled toward town, 6 miles southeast. At the living room window, looking south, I saw movement on the road. A figure, walking. Coming from the east, moving west along the center line of Harlan Road with a particular gait of someone who has been walking for a long time and has stopped caring about efficiency. Not shuffling, not lurching. Walking with exhaustion, which is different from walking with damage. I watched for 2 full minutes before I was sure. The figure was human, alive, uninfected. A woman, I thought, based on frame and movement, wearing a dark jacket and carrying something against her chest, a bag or a bundle. She stopped in the road directly in front of the Callaways' driveway. She stood there, looking at the house, and I pulled back from the window because the instinct to hide was stronger than the desire for contact, and that ratio frightened me. She started up the driveway. I went to the basement. I locked the door. I sat on the cot with the Glock in my lap and listened to her footsteps on the front porch. Real footsteps, booted, the deliberate weight of a person who wanted to be heard. Then knocking. 3 firm knocks on the front door. "Hello?" A woman's voice, rough at the edges, loud enough to carry. "Anyone inside? I can see the chimney's not running, but there's tracks in the yard. I'm not sick. I'm not armed. I just need water." I didn't move. She knocked again, Please. I've been walking since yesterday. I can't make it to the next house without water. Silence. I'll leave, she said. I will. But if someone's in there, I'm asking you to be a person about this. Be a person about this. The phrase hit me somewhere below logic. I'd spent 17 days becoming something efficient and frightened. And this stranger on the porch was asking me to remember what I'd been before. I went upstairs. I stood on the other side of the front door with the gun behind my back and said, I'm going to open the door. Stay on the porch. Let me see your hands. I heard her step back. Okay, hands up, see? I opened the door. She was maybe 40. Short, dark hair cut unevenly, like she'd done it herself with kitchen scissors. A bruise along her left jaw, yellowing at the edges, days old. The jacket was too big for her, men's canvas, and the bundle against her chest was a backpack held by one strap. Her hands were up, palms forward, and they were shaking. I'm Leah, she said. I was in Granton. It's gone. Granton was the nearest town of any size, 12 miles east. Population just under 8,000. I'd bought groceries there. I'd gotten my oil changed there. Gone how? I asked. Every way a place can be gone. I gave her water. I let her inside. I closed the door and locked it, and stood in the Callaways' living room watching a stranger drink from a mason jar with the desperation of someone who understands that thirst is not a metaphor. She drained it, filled it again from the kitchen tap, drained it again, and then sat on the floor because her legs gave out. She told me about Granton in pieces, not in order, the way people describe disasters from the inside out, starting with the detail that won't leave and working backward toward the thing they're actually trying to say. The detail that wouldn't leave Leah was the school, the elementary school on Poplar Street where she'd worked as a custodian. They'd used it as a shelter when the evacuation orders came. 200 people in a building designed for 400 children. It felt safe. Cinder block walls, interior rooms with no windows, a cafeteria with commercial kitchen equipment. The infected came on the third night. Not a horde, not the wave you see in the movies. 6 people. Just 6, walking in through the gymnasium doors that someone had propped open because the building was too hot with 200 bodies and no functioning HVAC. 6 was enough. I climbed out a bathroom window, Leah said. I could hear it behind me the whole time, not screaming. The sound people make when they stop being people. I didn't ask her to elaborate. I understood she was drawing a line, and the line was all I needed. Leah slept on the living room couch for 4 hours, while I sat in the armchair across the room with the gun on the side table and watched her breathe. Not out of suspicion, out of fascination. Another person breathing in the same space. A sound of exhalation that wasn't mine. I hadn't realized how hungry I was for it until it was there. When she woke, we talked. Not about what she'd seen, she'd drawn that line, and I respected it, but about logistics, where she was going, what she knew, what was left. There's a National Guard checkpoint outside Terre Haute, she said. Or there was, 5 days ago. Someone on the road told me. I don't know if it's still there. Terre Haute is 50 miles west. I know. On foot, in January, with what's out there. I know what's out there, Owen. She used my name. I'd told it to her when I opened the door and forgotten I'd done it. Hearing it in her voice made me reel in a way I hadn't felt in 17 days. Stay, I said. The word came out before the thought finished forming. I've got a basement, food, water, shelter. It's secure. You can rest. Figure out a plan. Leah looked at me with an expression I'd later learn was her default. Evaluative, unhurried, giving nothing away while calculating everything. She had the face of someone who'd been making hard decisions long before the world ended, the kind of lines around the eyes that come from squinting at problems, not from laughing. "How long have you been here alone?" she asked. 17 days. "And before that?" "The family who owns this house. They left to get a relative. They were supposed to be back in 3 days." She nodded slowly. "How much food?" "At current rationing, 3 weeks for one person. With 2 of us, 10 days, maybe 12 if we cut portions." "Then I can stay 4 days. After that, I'm taking more than I'm worth." "That's not..." "It is. Math doesn't care about hospitality." She sat up on the couch, pulling the too big jacket around her shoulders. 4 days. I rest, I eat, I fill my water bottles, and I go. You keep your reserves and your basement, and you survive." I wanted to argue. The argumentative instinct was rooted not in logic, but in the desperate, shameful need to not be alone again. I recognized it and said nothing, because recognizing your own weakness doesn't make it less powerful. It just makes you quieter about it. Leah moved into the basement that evening. She took the cot against the west wall and arranged her few possessions with the precision of someone accustomed to small spaces. The backpack at the foot of the cot, a folding knife on the floor within reach, boots positioned for fast entry. She was asleep within minutes. I lay on my cot across the room and listened to her breathing, and felt the basement reshape itself around the presence of a second person. The same room, different air. Over the next 3 days, Leah told me more. Not about Granton, she held that at arm's length, but about the roads. The infrastructure was collapsing. Power was gone across most of southern Indiana. Cell networks had failed in the first week. The military was concentrated around major population centers, and everything between those centers was unpatrolled, unprotected, and increasingly occupied by infected whose patterns of movement were changing. "They're not just wandering," she said on the second night, sitting cross-legged on her cot, eating rice with a camping spork. "When I first saw them, they moved like drunks. No direction, no purpose. Now they cluster. They find buildings and they stay near them. Not inside, near. Like they remember what buildings mean, but can't remember what to do about it." Learning? I don't think it's learning. I think it's reflex, muscle memory. Whatever the infection does to the brain, it doesn't erase everything. It erases intention. But the body remembers patterns. This was the first time anyone had described the infected to me in terms that weren't purely terrified, Leah observed. Even in the worst of it, she'd been watching, cataloging, trying to understand. That quality detached curiosity under duress was either a survival mechanism or a deficiency of fear. And either way, it made her the most competent person I'd ever sat in a basement with. On the 4th morning, she packed her bag. I watched her pack the way you watch someone dismantle something you needed. Each item she placed in the backpack was a subtraction from the room. The folding knife, the extra socks she'd dried by the propane flame, 2 cans of beans I'd insisted she take, a filled water bottle. The space she'd occupied for 4 days was reasserting its emptiness in real time. "Come with me," I said. Leah tightened the drawstring on the backpack without looking up. "You've got 3 weeks of food down here. On the road, that's gone in days. There's a checkpoint at Terre Haute." There might be a checkpoint. 5-day-old information from a stranger. That's not a plan, Owen. That's a prayer. And staying here is math. You know how much food you have. You know how much water. You can control the variables. Until the food runs out. Then what? She looked at me. The bruise on her jaw had faded to a green-yellow crescent that made her look older than she was. Then you make a different decision, but you make it from a position of strength. Full rest, clear head, not exhausted and dehydrated on a highway with 50 miles of open ground between you and a rumor. She was right. I knew she was right. And I resented her for it with an intensity that surprised me, because the resentment wasn't about logic. It was about the fact that she could walk away. She had the capacity to choose movement over shelter, and I didn't, and the difference between us was not circumstance, but temperament. "I'll leave you something," she said, and from her jacket pocket she produced a folded road map, actual paper, gas station variety, creased and soft from handling. She spread it on the cot and pointed. "If you do leave, go north first, not west. The main roads west are clogged. Abandoned vehicles, some of them still occupied. North on County Road 9 takes you through open farmland for about 12 miles. Then you can cut west on Route 46. Less traffic, less cover too. So you move during the day and find a structure before dark." She traced the route with her finger. I memorized it. "Leah." "Yeah." "If the checkpoint's real, if you make it, is there a way to send word?" She folded the map and placed it on my cot. "If I make it, and if there's any communication infrastructure left, I'll try. But don't wait for it. Don't make that your reason for staying." She went upstairs. I followed. At the front door, she paused and did something I didn't expect. She put her hand on my chest, flat, over the sternum, and held it there for 2 seconds. Not a romantic gesture, a grounding one. The kind of touch that says, "You're here. You're real. This is happening." "Be a person about this," she said, echoing her own words from 4 days earlier. And I understood that she was giving them a different meaning now. Not be a person and open the door. Be a person and survive. Be a person when the math gets inhuman. She walked down the driveway to Harlan Road, turned west, and disappeared behind the same tree line that had swallowed the Callaway Suburban 21 days earlier. I stood at the window and watched the empty road until the cold drove me back down. 3 days after Leah left, the sounds returned. Not the cautious exploratory tapping of day 4. This was heavier. Multiple points of contact against the house, distributed across the north and east walls simultaneously, which meant more than one. I was in the basement when it started. Late afternoon, approaching dark, the time of day I'd learned to dread because the transition from light to night was when the infected moved most actively. Leah's observation about their clustering behavior was confirmed every evening. I could sometimes hear them in the tree line, not distinct sounds, but a collective disturbance, like the forest itself was restless. The impacts against the house were not aggressive. No smashing, no breaking. Pressure, weight. The same leaning and sliding I'd heard before, multiplied. I counted contact points by sound. At least 3 distinct locations on the north wall, 2 on the east. 5, minimum 5. They stayed for hours. I sat in the dark. I'd killed the LED to conserve power and listened to 5 dead or dying people press themselves against the walls of a house they probably didn't know was a house anymore. The wood creaked. The siding flexed. At one point, a window groaned under sustained pressure, and I held the Glock in both hands and aimed at the ceiling like that would do anything. They left before dawn. I know because the silence that replaced them had a different texture, emptier, cleaner, like the air itself exhaled. I didn't go upstairs until midday. When I did, I found what they'd left behind. The north-facing windows were smeared with the same dark residue I'd seen on day 5, but thicker, layered, handprints visible in the grease. The garden bed beneath the kitchen window had been churned into mud by bare feet. And on the east wall, where the siding met the foundation, something had been pulling at the seam. The bottom edge of one clapboard was bent outward, the nails partially extracted, as though fingers had gripped the edge and pulled with slow, unthinking persistence. They weren't testing the house. They were working on it, not with intelligence, with repetition, the way water works on stone. I reinforced the basement door that afternoon. I found Dale's tools in a storage bin, a drill, screws, brackets, and mounted 2 steel shelf brackets across the door frame as additional cross bracing. It took me 3 hours because my hands were shaking, and the drill battery was low, and I had to stop twice to listen. The next night, they came back. More this time, I couldn't count the contact points because they overlapped. The sound was almost oceanic, the sustained, arrhythmic pressure of bodies against wood. I heard glass crack, not shatter crack, a fracture spreading through a pane under load. I chambered around and pointed the gun at the basement door and held that position until my arms burned and my vision blurred, and the sound above me became a kind of weather I was living beneath. At some point, I must have fallen asleep, because I woke on the floor with the gun beside me, and the house was silent, and there was a cold draft moving through the basement that hadn't been there before. The crack had become a breach. Somewhere upstairs, a window had given way, and the January air was flowing through the house and down through the gaps around the basement door. The barrier between inside and outside had been punctured. The equation had changed. I spent the next 2 days in a state of functional paralysis. The basement was still secure, concrete walls, reinforced door, independent ventilation, but the house above was compromised. And a compromised house meant that anything upstairs was no longer safely accessible. The kitchen, the mudroom, the bedrooms where I'd found quilts and warmth, the windows I'd used for perimeter checks. All of it now belonged to whatever came through the broken glass. I took stock of what I had below, knowing this was the final inventory that mattered. Food, 11 days at single meal rationing. Water, the hand pump still worked, pulling from the well, but the pipe ran through the floor above, and I didn't know whether a breach upstairs could compromise it. Propane, 5 canisters, ammunition, 3 full magazines, and a box of loose rounds. Flashlight, radio still static on every frequency. Notebook, pen, the map Leah had left, Margaret's coat, Nora's quilts, the smell of people who were gone. 11 days. After that, hunger. After hunger, weakness. After weakness. The kind of despair that makes bad decisions feel logical. I could stay 11 days in the basement, hoping the infected didn't find the door, hoping the food lasted, hoping something changed. Hoping was the operative word, and hope, I was learning, was a resource that depleted faster than calories. Or I could leave. The thought had lived in me since Leah walked down the driveway, but I'd kept it penned because leaving meant opening the door, climbing the stairs, crossing the house, stepping outside, and entering a world that had stopped being mine. It meant giving up the only safety I'd known for 24 days. It meant trusting a paper map, a route described by a woman I'd known for 4 days, and my own body, which was thinner and weaker and colder than it had been when this started. But staying was a countdown. And a countdown is just a slower version of the thing you're afraid of. I made the decision on day 26. I didn't make it bravely. I didn't make it with conviction. I made it the way you step off a ledge in a dream. Not because you want to fall, but because standing still has become impossible. I would leave at first light. North on County Road 9, 12 miles of farmland. Then west on Route 46, toward Terre Haute, toward the checkpoint that might or might not exist. I packed the backpack I'd assembled from the Callaway's camping supplies. Food for 5 days, water in 2 bottles, the Glock with 2 magazines, a flashlight, the map, Margaret's coat over my own jacket, Dale's gloves. I left the rest, the cots, the shelving, the cans I couldn't carry, the radio that spoke only in silence. I wrote a note and left it on the cot. My name is Owen McGuire. I was a guest of the Callaway family. They left on January 11th and did not return. If anyone finds this, I went north on CR 9, then west on 46, heading for Terre Haute. It is now February 6th. I signed it. I don't know why. Habit. The bureaucratic muscle memory of a man who once graded papers. Then I waited for dawn. The basement door opened into a house I no longer recognized. Not because of damage, the damage was surprisingly limited. One window broken in the living room, the curtain pulled half off its rod and hanging like a flag of surrender. Cold air moving freely, frost on the interior surfaces closest to the breach. A smell I hadn't encountered before. Organic, sour, not rot exactly, but the edge of it. The metabolic exhaust of infected bodies. Nothing was inside, not now, but the evidence of visitation was everywhere. Muddy tracks on the hardwood, barefooted, overlapping, moving in patterns that suggested neither purpose nor randomness, but something between the pacing of an animal in a space it doesn't want to leave but can't use. The kitchen table had been pushed against the wall. A chair was overturned. The refrigerator door was open, its contents long spoiled. And something had been through them, packaging torn, containers on the floor. I moved through the house in under 2 minutes. I didn't look at the family photos on the hallway wall. I didn't look at the hook where Margaret's coat had hung before I'd taken it. I went to the front door, unlocked it, and stepped outside for the first time in 26 days. The cold was immediate and absolute. February in southern Indiana, the air dry and sharp, the sky a pale gray that promised nothing. The yard was mud and dead grass. My cottage sat to the west, exactly as I'd left it 5 weeks earlier, its windows dark, its door closed, looking like a painting of a place where someone used to live. I turned north. The property line ran along a fence of split cedar, and beyond it, County Road 9 cut straight through dormant cornfields that stretched flat and open for miles. The visibility was extraordinary. On a day like this, you could see movement from half a mile away. The openness felt like safety and exposure simultaneously, nowhere for anything to hide, including me. I walked. The first hour was surreal. My legs were weak from weeks of confinement, and the backpack's weight sat on my shoulders like a judgment. But the air, the cold, clean, enormous air, moving freely around me with no walls to define it. I hadn't known how much I'd missed volume. The basement had shrunk the world to 20 by 30 feet, and now it was infinite in every direction, and I was terrified and grateful in equal measure. County Road 9 was empty. No vehicles, no people, no infected. Just pavement and fields, and the distant tree lines, and the silence of a world that had stopped commuting. I walked on the road itself, staying center line, because the shoulders were soft with mud, and because anything approaching would be visible long before it arrived. At the 2-mile mark, I passed a farmhouse set back from the road. Dark. No smoke from the chimney. A pickup truck in the driveway with its driver's door open. The interior light long dead. I didn't stop. I didn't investigate. Dale's rule extended. Don't investigate. At the 4-mile mark, I saw the first body. It was in the ditch on the east side of the road. A man, face down, wearing a hunting jacket and jeans. No visible injury from where I stood. He could have been sleeping if people slept face down in ditches in February. I gave him a wide berth 20 feet and kept walking. I didn't check for a pulse. I didn't look for bite marks. I added him to the notebook later. A single line. Mile 4. Male, prone, east ditch. No movement. The body was a paragraph break in the story I was telling myself. Before it, I was a man taking a walk on a cold morning. After it, I was a man walking through the aftermath. By midday, I'd covered 8 miles, and my legs were telling me things I didn't want to hear. The muscles burned with a specific protein-starved ache that I recognized from the biology units I'd taught. My body was metabolizing itself. The weeks of cold and rationing had cost me more than weight. They'd cost me the capacity to sustain effort. I needed to rest, and I needed to eat. And I needed to do both in a place that offered some protection. The overpass appeared at mile 9, where County Road 9 passed beneath a state highway. A concrete bridge spanning the road, maybe 40 feet above, with sloped embankments on either side, thick with dead brush. Under the bridge, the road passed through a short tunnel of shadow. And on the south side of the embankment, partially concealed by brush, a maintenance access, a small recessed area in the concrete with a metal door, padlocked. I sat against the embankment wall, out of the wind, and ate. A can of beans, cold with a plastic spoon, half a bottle of water. The food hit my stomach and radiated outward, and I closed my eyes and felt the calories enter my bloodstream like a transfusion. I heard the vehicle before I saw it, an engine, distant but approaching from the west, from the highway above. I pressed myself against the concrete and looked up. The sound grew a diesel engine, heavy, moving at moderate speed. A truck. It passed overhead, the bridge vibrating with its weight, and was gone to the east within seconds. Someone was driving. Someone had fuel, a working vehicle, and a destination. The existence of that truck restructured my understanding of the world. It wasn't all basements and ditches. Somewhere, infrastructure persisted. Somewhere, things still moved with purpose. I rested for 30 minutes, then pushed on. The intersection with Route 46 was 3 miles ahead, and I wanted to reach it before the lights started to fail. Leah's route had been precise. North on CR9, then west on 46. She described the terrain open farmland giving way to low wooded hills and warned me about one specific stretch. "There's a town called Ridgeline about 6 miles west on 46, she'd said. "Don't go through it. There's a bypass road, runs south of the town, gravel, used to be a quarry access. Take that. Ridgeline had a shelter at the community center, and when shelters fail, the infected concentrate." When shelters fail. She'd said it with the certainty of someone who'd watched it happen. I reached the intersection at 3 in the afternoon. Route 46 stretched east-west, a 2-lane state road in better condition than CR9, but equally empty. I turned west and felt the road rise gently beneath my feet as the terrain began to change, the fields giving way to rolling ground. The first trees appearing in clusters, then thickening into proper stands of oak and maple, leafless but dense enough to limit visibility. The openness was gone. The safety exposure equation reversed. Now there was cover for me and for everything else. I walked faster. The gun was in my hand now, not holstered, and every sound in the roadside brush registered in my nervous system like voltage. A branch falling. A bird, actual wildlife, still existing, indifferent to apocalypse exploding from a thicket. My own breathing, too loud, too fast. At 5 miles, I found the quarry access road. A gravel track turning south off Route 46, marked with a faded sign for a limestone company. I took it without hesitation and left the state road behind. The gravel road was narrow and overgrown at the edges, climbing a low ridge before descending into a shallow valley. At the bottom of the valley, I could see a structure, a metal building, industrial, the kind of prefabricated shell used for equipment storage. Its bay door was closed. Its windows were intact. It sat at the end of the quarry access road, like an answer to a question I hadn't finished asking. I approached carefully, circled the building at a distance, looking for signs of occupation or breach. Nothing. The gravel lot around it was undisturbed. The windows showed only dark interior. The bay door was latched from the outside, which meant no one and nothing was inside. I unlatched it, rolled the door up 3 feet, ducked inside. The building was a single open space, maybe 60 by 40, with a concrete floor and metal walls and a ceiling of corrugated steel. Empty except for a rusted front-end loader parked in the back corner and a row of metal shelving along one wall, holding nothing but dust and a few plastic jugs. Cold, but out of the wind, out of sight. Defensible, if you counted a metal wall as defense. I rolled the bay door back down, latched it from the inside, and sat on the concrete floor in the dark and let my legs stop shaking. I didn't intend to go to Ridgeline. The quarry road was supposed to bypass it entirely, curving south around the town and reconnecting with Route 46 on the western side. But roads are not always what maps say they are, and the quarry access ended at a washed-out bridge over a dry creek bed that was neither dry nor bridgeable. February thaw had turned the creek into a channel of brown water 4 feet deep, and the bridge, or what remained of it, was a pair of concrete abutments with nothing between them. I stood at the edge and felt the plan dissolve. The detour options were limited. South meant open terrain with no road, no landmarks, and no guarantee of reconnecting with 46. East meant backtracking to the state road and trying to find another way around. North meant Ridgeline. I chose north because it was 2 miles instead of 6, and because my legs wouldn't give me 6 more miles that day, and because the calculus of exhaustion eventually overrides the calculus of fear. Ridgeline was a town the way a lot of southern Indiana towns. Our town's a central intersection with a gas station, a hardware store, a church, and a handful of side streets lined with clapboard houses. Population before, maybe 1,200. I approached from the south, following a residential street that climbed a gentle slope toward the main intersection. I saw the community center from 3 blocks away. A flat-roofed municipal building with a parking lot that had been turned into something else. A perimeter of vehicles arranged bumper to bumper in a rough rectangle around the building. A barricade. The kind of improvised fortification you build when official help stops coming. And you realize that the building you're in is all you have. It had failed. I could see that from 3 blocks away, too. The vehicle barricade had been breached on the east side. 2 cars pushed apart, the gap between them wide enough for bodies. The community center's front doors were open, dark inside. The parking lot was littered with debris I chose not to catalog because some details serve no purpose except to haunt you, and I've been haunted enough. I moved through Ridgeline in 15 minutes, staying on the western edge, keeping the community center at maximum distance. I saw no infected. The town was empty, not abandoned, because abandoned implies people left. This was emptied, drained. The difference is in what remains. 3 blocks past the intersection, I heard something that stopped me. A radio. playing music, faint, tinny, coming from inside a house on my left, a white two-story with a wraparound porch and a garden fence still standing. The music was classical, something with strings, playing on a loop or from a source with enough power to keep transmitting. I stood on the sidewalk and listened to Vivaldi or Bach or whoever it was, playing to an audience of broken windows and empty streets. And I felt something I can only call temporal vertigo. The sensation that two timescales were occupying the same space. The music belonged to a world of concert halls and weekend mornings. The street belonged to a world that had consumed its concert halls. And I was standing at the intersection of those two worlds, with a gun in one hand and a can of beans in my pocket. I didn't investigate the house, but I stood there for longer than I should have, letting the music fill a space inside me that had been emptied out by weeks of silence and fear. Then I walked on. By the time I cleared the western edge of Ridgeline, the light was failing. I found shelter in a detached garage behind a ranch house door intact. No windows, a riding mower, and gardening tools inside. I barricaded the door with the mower, wrapped myself in Margaret's coat and the emergency blanket from my pack, and lay in the dark, smelling gasoline and fertilizer and listening to the night assemble itself around me. No sounds, no tapping, no pressure against walls. I slept for 4 hours, the longest unbroken sleep I'd had since January. The last 18 miles took 2 days. Not because of distance, 18 miles is walkable in a day under normal conditions. But the conditions were not normal, and neither was I. My body was operating in a deficit that no single can of cold beans could correct. I stopped every hour. I rested more than I moved. I rationed water with the precision of someone who'd learned that the margin between functional and non-functional was measured in swallows. Route 46 beyond Ridgeline entered terrain that was both easier and harder. Rolling hills, intermittent forest, the occasional cleared farm. Easier because the road was in good condition, straight stretches with clear sight lines. Harder because the hills meant climbing. And climbing meant cardiovascular demand. I couldn't meet without stopping at the top of each rise to let my heart rate descend from the red zone. I saw infected twice. The first time, a group of 4, standing in a field roughly 200 yards north of the road. Standing, not walking, not pursuing, just standing in the dead grass, facing different directions, motionless. Leah's clustering behavior. They'd found the field and stopped and were now occupying it the way a person occupies a waiting room, present but without agenda. I walked past them on the road. They didn't turn, didn't react. 200 yards was apparently outside whatever radius triggered their attention. I kept my pace steady, my breathing controlled, and I didn't look back until I'd put a full half-mile between us. The second time was closer and worse. Day 2 of the final stretch, mid-morning, I came around a blind curve and found one standing in the road. A woman. Young, maybe Nora Calloway's age, maybe a little older, wearing pajama bottoms and a single shoe. Her arms hung at her sides, and her head was tilted at an angle that suggested the muscles on the left side of her neck had stopped working. Her eyes were open and pointed at nothing. I stopped. 20 feet between us. The Glock was in my hand, but I didn't raise it because she wasn't moving. And because she looked like somebody's daughter. And because the trigger pull of a Glock 19 is approximately 5.5 pounds, and I didn't know if I had that weight in me. She turned her head, slowly, the way a security camera pans. Her eyes found me. There was nothing behind them that I recognized as recognition. But the body responded. One foot shifted, then the other, a step toward me. I stepped off the road into the ditch, gave her 10 feet of clearance, and walked past her at a pace that was faster than walking, but not yet running. She turned to track me. She took 2 more steps in my direction. Then she stopped. Whatever impulse had animated her faded, and she stood in the road again, head tilted, arms slack. I didn't run. Running was a trigger, Leah had warned me. Movement above a certain speed activated something in them, predatory reflex, pursuit response. Whatever you want to call the remnant of a brain that recognizes fleeing prey. Walk, always walk. Walk like you belong to the same broken world they do. I walked. The checkpoint appeared on the afternoon of the second day. I'd almost stopped believing in it. The concept had become abstract. A narrative destination rather than a physical one. The kind of thing you move toward because stopping is worse. But there it was. A concrete overpass where Route 46 met the outskirts of Terre Haute. And beneath it, vehicles. Military vehicles. Humvees arranged in a line across the road, sandbag positions on either side, and the detail that made my knees buckle people. Standing upright, in uniform, armed and organized and intentional. I raised my hands. I'd learned that gesture from Leah, and now I performed it from the other side. The approaching stranger, palms forward, broadcasting harmlessness. A soldier stepped out from behind the barricade. Young, barely older than some of my former students. He had a rifle pointed in my general direction, not at me specifically, but at the space I occupied, which was close enough. Stop there. Are you injured? No. Have you been bitten, scratched, or exposed to bodily fluids from an infected individual? No. How long since your last contact with an infected person? 3 hours, one on the road. No physical contact. He spoke into a radio on his shoulder. A voice responded, too quiet to hear. He lowered the rifle slightly. Walked to the white tent on the right side of the road, hands visible at all times. You'll be screened. I walked. Behind the Humvee line, a small encampment materialized. Tents, a generator humming, a water station, a triage area with folding tables and medical supplies. Maybe 30 civilians visible, sitting on cots or standing in small groups with the particular stillness of people who have arrived somewhere and don't yet believe it. The screening took 2 hours. Temperature check, visual inspection, a series of questions about my route, my origin, my health history. A medic shone a light in my eyes and checked my lymph nodes and wrote something on a clipboard. You're underweight, she said. Significantly. I know. When did you last eat a full meal? I couldn't remember. They gave me soup. Hot soup. From a thermos poured into a paper cup, steam rising in the cold air. I held it with both hands and drank it. And the warmth entered me like a restoration of something I'd assumed was permanently lost. I sat on a cot in the civilian tent and looked at the other faces. Strangers. All of them carrying the same invisible weight. A man my age with a beard and hollow cheeks. A woman holding a child who wasn't crying but should have been. An elderly couple sitting shoulder to shoulder, their hands intertwined, not speaking. I didn't see Leah. I asked about her the next morning. The checkpoint maintained a registry, names, dates of arrival, destinations, and I gave a soldier Leah's name and description and watched him flip through pages on a clipboard. Leah Moran. I don't know her last name. Short, dark hair, around 40. She would have come through maybe a week ago, coming from the east on 46. He checked, turned pages, ran his finger down columns of handwritten entries. No one matching that description in the last 2 weeks. I asked him to check again. He did. Same result. She might have come through before we set up this position, he said. We've only been here 11 days. Before that, the checkpoint was further west, near the Wabash River. Records from that position were transferred to the main camp, but I don't have access from here. 11 days. The checkpoint had existed for 11 days. Leah had left the Callaways' house on day 21, which was 16 days ago. If she'd walked 50 miles at the pace I'd seen her walk, she could have made it in 4 or 5 days, which would have put her here before the checkpoint existed. She'd have arrived at an empty overpass and kept walking into Terre Haute proper, into whatever Terre Haute had become before the military established a perimeter. Or she hadn't made it. The 50 miles between the Callaways' house and this overpass were full of ditches and fields, and towns like Ridgeline, and people standing on roads in their pajamas. And any one of those things could have ended her walk. I didn't know. I still don't. What I do know is that I spent the next 3 days at the checkpoint asking every new arrival if they'd seen a woman matching her description. Nobody had. I described the route CR9 North, 46 West, the quarry bypass around Ridgeline, and got nothing but the blank, inward stares of people who had walked their own routes through their own horrors and couldn't absorb anyone else's. On the 4th day, the military began relocating checkpoint civilians to a larger camp near the Terre Haute airport. Buses, actual buses, running on diesel, driven by soldiers who looked barely old enough to drive. I boarded one. I sat by the window. The bus drove through the outskirts of Terre Haute, and I saw the city the way you see a body on an operating table. Opened up, its systems visible, some functioning, most not. Blocks of intact houses next to blocks of burned ones. A grocery store with its windows boarded and a line of people outside. A church with a Red Cross flag. A school with military vehicles in the parking lot. At the airport camp, I was processed again. Given a cot in a hangar with 200 other people. Given a meal card. Given a number. Owen McGuire, civilian intake 4471. I was a number now, which was both dehumanizing and comforting, because numbers are tracked, and tracked means not forgotten. I asked about the Callaways at intake. Dale and Margaret Callaway, traveling with 2 children, Nora, 14, and Bram, 11. Driving a Suburban, eastbound toward Evansville, departed January 11th. The intake officer searched a database on a laptop connected to a satellite uplink. The search took 11 seconds. No record of those names at any active intake point, she said. I can flag them as missing persons. Would you like me to do that? Yes. She typed their names. I spelled them. She asked for physical descriptions. I gave them. She asked my relationship to the family. Tenant, I said. And the word felt absurd. A relic of a world where people paid rent and had landlords, and the relationship between occupant and owner was governed by signed documents rather than survival. She flagged them. The Callaways became data points in a system designed to find people who were probably beyond finding. I thanked her. She moved to the next person in line. That night, in the hangar, I lay on a cot surrounded by the breathing of 200 strangers and opened the notebook I'd kept since the basement. I flipped to the first page. Day 1, January 11th. Callaways departed. Inventory, 26 cans corn. I read the whole thing, every entry, every temperature reading, every sound cataloged, every meal recorded, every small notation of a world contracting around me. The notebook was a map of who I'd been, on a frightened man in a concrete room, counting cans, listening to silence, trying to make sense of what didn't have sense in it. I turned to a blank page and wrote, Day 41. Terre Haute Airport Camp. Alive, underweight, unarmed surrendered weapon at checkpoint intake. No word on Callaways, no word on Leah. The soup here is better than anything I've ever tasted, or I've forgotten what taste is supposed to be. Both might be true. I still carry Margaret's coat. They offered me a new one at the camp military surplus, insulated, practically superior in every way, and I took it. But I kept hers folded at the bottom of my cot. The lavender has faded. It smells like me now, like sweat and concrete and the particular scent of a body that has consumed itself and rebuilt from canned food and powdered milk. But if I press my face into the collar and breathe deeply enough, there's still something there. A ghost of a dryer sheet. The memory of a woman who handed me a list of phone numbers and hugged me like she was sorry for something she hadn't done yet. I teach again, not earth science. There's a children's area in Hangar C where the youngest residents are given something resembling school. And I volunteered because a man needs a reason to wake up that isn't just the absence of a reason to stay down. I teach them about rocks and weather and the layers of the earth beneath their feet. And sometimes, when they ask me questions I can't answer, I tell them I don't know. And it feels like the most honest sentence in the language. Bram Calloway waved at me through the glass. I think about that. The flat palm, the child behind the window, the car pulling away. I think about how trust is something you hand to a stranger along with a key, and how the stranger can honor it only by surviving, and how survival is not the same as rescue, but it's what I had to offer. The note is still in the basement. If anyone finds it, they'll know I was there. They'll know I left. They'll know which direction I walked. They won't know if I made it. But I did. For whatever that's worth, and some days, it's worth everything. And some days, I'm not sure I made it.